So how were you recruited for the Robinson program? And considering what you knew about George Mason, did you also know about the Robinson program
No, I
beforehand?
had no idea about the Robinson program. George Johnson got in touch with me, discussed it. I came out again, and so I could speak with him. I was very impressed with him, and let's talk about George Johnson. He explained what the Robinson Professor program was. Now, there were no Robinson professors at the time. He wanted to start the program with money from a grant from Clarence Robinson. And he made me an offer to come to George Mason as the first Robinson professor. And I didn't know, because I had a lot of wonderful things going on in Minnesota. I don't know if you know, but Minnesota is one of the best places to live in the world. It has superb social life. It's just a wonderful place to live with other human beings, very successful society. And we were very happy there, had a beautiful home, et cetera, et cetera. So we weren't quite sure that we wanted to make a move, or it was not part of our intention. And simultaneously, Cornell University made me an offer to come as a full professor in theater at Cornell. And so my wife and I had to visit Cornell, had to decide, do we want to stay, et cetera, et cetera. And at the time, I was invited to Sundance. That's the Sundance Institute in Provo, Utah, run by Robert Redford. And they wanted to do one of my plays there. So I was up at Sundance, and I was revolving what to do. My wife and I had talked about a move, and we decided that if we made a move, it should be to a new and daring place. It should not be to a highly established, superb Ivy League university like Cornell. But it should, because we were doing good things in Minnesota. I had the Playwrights Lab. I had theaters who were doing my work. That's a very important thing to a playwright. Equity theaters doing your work is, you don't get that by snapping your fingers. So we had revolved it and said, if we go any place, it should be to Mason. She had come out and visited Mason. It was very rudimentary in 1985 when we were talking about this. A lot of the instruction was going on in trailers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was quite a come down from the 55,000 student University of Minnesota, which is basically a major city in and of itself. University of Minnesota had and has its own Air Force, because it has such extensive mining operations and forestry, et cetera. So while I was at Sundance, which is a very beautiful location, working with John Malkovich, for example, was in my show there, Kathy Bates and so forth. I said, the thing to do is take the risk and go to Mason. By the way, the Cornell offer was financially much more lucrative by quite a bit. But I would go to, we would go to Mason. And so I was the first Robinson to be offered a contract and signed it. So that got the program started. Then 3 other Robinsons signed up, Thelma Levine, Robert Marquez, and Shaul Bakash. And they came in that fall. All this happened in the summer, spring and summer of '85. They came that fall. I didn't. I came in the following January. So I have not been the longest serving Robinson. That honor goes to Shaul Bakash. I came as a bachelor because we were all set up, the children were in school, and I got housing in one of the student dorms. It was very unattractive. I spent a lot of time at the field house playing basketball. And I got started in January, and so then there were 4, and we were the first 4 Robinsons in the academic year '85 through '86. Okay. So that's a beginning of an answer to your question. Yeah.
So what were your first impressions of George Johnson when you met him?
George Johnson is one of the greatest university presidents of the 20th century. If you take a look at who the candidates might be and look at their universities or colleges when they started and when they left, I think you'll see what I mean. Being president of Harvard is a great thing. However, Harvard's here and when you came, and it's probably there when you leave. But Johnson really changed the place. He was a visionary, but his visionary qualities were coupled with a keen and acute intellect, wide reading. He said his knowledge in any area is only an inch deep. Well, it was pretty good, pretty solid inch or so, because he knew a lot about a lot of things and certainly enough to make judgments. Of course, he was an expert in literature, literary fields. He was a combination of Mark Twain and P.T. Barnum. There was a lot of salesman to him. There was a lot of showman to him. He was very tall, taller than most tall people. He's a big guy, and a winning smile because it was genuine. He knew what he was doing. He was building a major university on the Potomac. Potomac is actually a little way away, but that was his phrase always. It would be Paris on the Potomac, or it would be Stanford on the Potomac, some marvelous thing on the Potomac. And I said, okay, I think I get what you're getting at. So he was also open. One of the advantages of being highly intelligent and well-read is that you're not afraid. You're not afraid to talk to people. You're not afraid to talk about things you don't know because you figure you can understand them with reasonable celerity, and the person you're talking to will probably help you doing that. So he was a wonderful person to talk to, and that little cadre of four Robinsons met with him regularly, informally quite a bit, but formally once a month, scheduled. But I would drop over to his office and come on in and talk about ideas with him. He wanted me because I had won the Distinguished Teaching Award at University of Minnesota, and I had done this board service, and I was a producing playwright, and I was a full professor of theater and English, and I have a degree in physics, so he liked that interdisciplinarity. And it was and I do know those disciplines. So he liked that, and what he wanted to do was brainstorm. And he said, Paul, I don't care what you do, as long as you get something going here. Get something going. And we did. We got a lot of things going because we worked together very, very closely. He said, I can't guarantee everything you want will happen, but I will swing the bat for you. He used a baseball metaphor, and he did. He always would swing the bat for you. He'd go to bat for you and help out. And one of the most interesting ideas we had back when he was considering me for a Robinson professorship was an idea I offered to him, which was, I love being a custodian of culture. I'm a devoted Shakespearean. I love William Shakespeare. He and I are best friends. My children think of him as their uncle. He's very well known in our family. And so, when I teach Shakespeare, I try to, get out of the way of all that genius and let it permeate the students, and that has happened. So I'm all in favor of that. However, there is more to life than being a custodian of something that is truly wonderful and transmitting it, which is a perfectly legitimate academic function. And that more is, it came from my experiences in Chicago and Minnesota, which is in addition to understanding culture, transmitting culture, it would be creating culture. If you want to be Stanford on the Potomac or the Czech Republic on the such and such, down the snake den run, whatever it is that you're interested in doing. One way of doing it would be to foster an environment in which people create marvelous things. It could be a marvelous physics formula, or it could be a marvelous play. That's what I personally was interested in. And plays are an extremely powerful art form because they have all the art forms in them. They have music, they have philosophy in the dialogue and so forth, they have storytelling, and they're performance art. And so it's no accident that the Greeks are still alive and Shakespeare is still alive, because they're performance artists. Just recently, Damian Lewis was asked by The Guardian to do, in honor of Shakespeare's 400th death day, a soliloquy of Mark Antony from Caesar. And he did, giving it the Damian Lewis spin, touch, twist, Redbeard, grimace. And there's Shakespeare coming alive again in interpretation. It's one of the great advantages of performing art. Beethoven, Mozart. So I said, what if we did a lot with the arts? And he said, that's what I want to do. I want to do a lot with the arts. And what if one of the things we did there was not only put on plays and operas for the students and the wider community, but what if we also created new plays, created a new Aeschylus, might be a woman, create a new Molière, create a new Peter Schaffer, you know. And he said, well, how do you do that? And I said, well, I have a lot of experience in that because I had worked in Chicago. I worked with the Playwrights Center in Minnesota. I knew how to do it because we had done it, and we'd done it quite successfully. The Minnesota playwrights have been extensively produced on main stages. And I said, now to do that, we would add that in, because he wanted an arts center, and he wanted me to help plan that, which I did, for which I gave my blood. And if you remind me, I will get back to that point in a minute, but I want to get this one established first. A way of creating new culture would be to have a theater on campus which would be a professional level equity theater, hiring equity actors from probably the DC area, but any place, LA, New York, any place you could get them, and involving the students in those productions, which is a great thing for them because then they can get their equity card. Because students have a catch-22 with regard to that. And the goal would be that we would be so astute in choosing new plays that some of them would actually catch on and become part of the American theatrical scene.